Hello, and welcome to this episode of Teachers Talk Tech, an EdTech podcast by Cambridge University Press and Assessment for language teachers by language teachers on using technology inside and outside of the classroom. My name is Hayo, and my guests today are Nick Peachy, Pedagogical Director of Peachy Publications, and Anne-Marie Murphy from Cambridge University Press and Assessment. We have a really interesting topic today, as of course we always do, but today is to do with the role of AI chatbots in particular and AI more generally. But specifically, really, we're trying to explore in this conversation what some of the benefits and perhaps some of the challenges are around using chatbots in language learning and teaching. So I'm going to start off with you, Nick, with the easy question: what actually are AI chatbots, and how do we sort of distinguish between AI in general and chatbots in particular?
So basically, a chatbot is a kind of computer program that you can interact with in a very natural way using your voice or using text. You don't have to have a programming language or something like that to get it to do work for you. You can just sort of speak to it like you would a person and ask it to do things for you. I guess AI more generally can be programmed to do specific tasks or specific series of tasks nowadays as well. And so that's a little bit different. It can be programmed or prompted to create videos for you or to mark students' homework or something like that.
Would it be worthwhile thinking of chatbot as interface between an AI engine or large language model or whatever and the user?
Yeah, that's right. But it's a very kind of natural interface, almost like speaking to a person who's on the computer somewhere. You can talk to it and have a discussion with it and kind of negotiate what you want it to do. If it's giving you material that you're not happy with, you can sort of chat about what's wrong with it and get it to improve it in a very natural way, like you would with the person.
Yeah, interesting. And I'm really curious to hear about the potential benefits of using these chatbots. I've used them in the past before the arrival of ChatGPT and other more current AI models. But I'm really keen to hear from some of you, and I'm going to start with you, Anne Marie, about some of the potential use cases, the benefits for us as teachers, chatbots to support language learning. Can you give us some idea of what the most commonly used, applications are?
Well, some of the applications that are out there and things that we're exploring at Cambridge offer instant personalized feedback, which, if a teacher has a class of 30 students, and we know that teacher talking time from research can be up to 50% of that lesson, an hour, let's say, it's very difficult for a teacher to manage the feedback and to actually listen to individuals and give personalized feedback. So that's one great advantage. Then, if learners use the bots outside the classroom, they can repeat tasks as many times as they wish. Because of the AI, the nature of AI, each time the task will be slightly different from the task before. The conversation will never be exactly the same. So, yeah, I think those are the two main advantages. But I mean, the fact that they can be used in and outside the classroom when there may not be access to a teacher or a speaking partner is a massive advantage.
I think one of the other advantages for students is that there isn't the kind of pressure or self-consciousness when you're talking to a chatbot. Especially if you're using it at home, you don't have to worry about, whether you're making mistakes or things like that. And one of the other things that I found when I first started using chatbots with my students, I had a group of kind of quite young teenage students and they were interacting with a chatbot and they were asking it actually some quite deep and meaningful questions, asking it about things like love and what it meant to love someone and things like that, which I can't imagine, my students doing in an open class, in front of their teacher or with their teacher or anything like that. So they felt they were able to ask it questions that they wouldn't normally ask a person. And I think that was really quite powerful aspect of the interaction. They found that very motivating.
Yeah, we're running a pilot at the moment, actually, Nick and Hayo, and one of the teachers in the pilots said exactly that. Because it's an app, it's not a real person, and that the students will be able to express themselves better without feeling embarrassed about making a mistake.
So just recapping, because you've mentioned, the two of you have mentioned sort of three, broadly speaking, three different kind of domains of potential benefit. One is around access, increasing the opportunity for learners to get feedback, practice, have an opportunity to interact. And you could argue that that is a practical or sort of a technical sort of benefit, and a really, really important one. And you mentioned, Emery, learning beyond the classroom, which I think is such a powerful potential use case, especially, of course, for those learners who are living in countries and situations where they don't have regular access to teachers. I'm thinking, for example, of refugee populations. The second is a pedagogical benefit of personalization. Again, Emery, you mentioned the possibility of tailoring practice and exercises, etc., to an individual's learner's needs, which of course has potentially a huge benefit as well. And then thirdly, Nick, you mentioned, I suppose, an affective benefit. Affect meaning emotion, the emotional aspect, the affective aspect of learning. So learners who are perhaps anxious to speak in public, or who want to talk about topics that are just too personal to raise with a teacher. So I think these are three really interesting domains. Of course, so far we've been speaking about the potential benefits to learners, and of course by indirectly to teachers in terms of supporting learning. But I could also imagine that there are potential benefits to using chatbots to teachers as, for example, a tool to support us, whether it be in practical sense or whether it be in supporting our own professional development. Nick, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there are lots of different benefits for teachers. I think, at the very basic level, a chatbot can help them plan lessons and work through planning lessons with the teacher. The teacher can use the chatbot to adapt materials or create materials if they don't feel that they're, right for their students. Maybe they're culturally not right and they can adapt it, or maybe the level's too difficult or too easy. And, you can get the chatbot to adapt that material for you. There's another level, is the admin level, is that it can save teachers time and can help with admin and, keeping track of student scores, analyzing student scores and generating reports based on that and that kind of thing. But I think one of the most powerful things about it is that it can actually act as a coach for teachers. If you're prompting it correctly and prompting it to interact with you, it can walk you through different processes. An example would be reflection. I know that, reflection is a very important part of teacher development. And often we kind of mean to do it, but when you sit on your own kind of reflecting, you write a few notes in your journal and think, oh, I'm never going to look at this again, but you can actually program the chatbot to walk you through the process of reflecting. So I had an example where I've got a prompt that will walk me through Gibbs' reflective cycle, and it will ask questions and wait for me to answer. So I type in my answers to its questions, it will ask me the next question, and it will walk me through this whole reflective process. And at the end of that, it will help me sort of produce an action plan based on that. And I think that's quite powerful. Other things are things like planning SMART goals or development goals. It will help you make those and help you walk you through those processes. And I think that's kind of one of the important ways forward with chatbots is, to the first reaction of most people is, great, this will do work for me. But that means, you don't develop, if it's doing the work for you. Whereas if you're interacting with it and programming it to be your coach, it will help you understand the processes and walk you through processes so that you work with it, together with it, and develop together. And I think that's really important.
I really like what you said. Think of it as a mentor or a coach, someone to interact with in a safe environment, right? Because there's nobody to feel foolish in front of, really. And so, yes, this is, of course, help in-service teachers in terms of some of the practical benefits you mentioned, like materials development and test design and things like that. But also, I would imagine for pre-service teachers who are still, feeling their way and would really benefit from, a sort of a collaborative reflection on what they've done and what worked and what didn't work, again in a safe environment. One question I have about this is, one of the key issues that we are facing in the field of education in general, and language education is no exception, is a shortage of teachers. And that is exacerbated, that is worsened by the fact that increasingly many teachers leave the profession, and increasingly many language teachers start as language teachers, but then within a few years move on to other jobs. So I suppose one of my questions is, to what extent this type of tool might be able to provide a level of support, maybe motivation, and again that word affective or emotional support to teachers to help them deal with the daily stresses of you know running your language classroom.
Yeah, I think there are ways that that chatbots can help us with that. I mean, as I mentioned before, on the admin level, it can take a lot of pressure of the administrative side off of teachers, and I think that is one of the things that teachers really suffer from, is that kind of having to do loads of admin work, having to write lots of reports. A lot of that could now be kind of auto-generated, if you like. On the other side, I think it can sort of act as a coach and give, emotional support to teachers. You can talk through problems with it. So again, going back to things like this sort of programming it to walk you through Gibbs cycle of reflection, you can also have sort of other prompts that help walk you through a problem that maybe you had in class, or you can, tell it how you're feeling and get advice from it. And I think those things can be very helpful. I know it's not the same as having a real person there to sort of help, but there are advantages to that as well, because you don't have to worry about what it thinks of you, or whether it's going to tell other people in your staff room that you're cracking up. You can actually have an honest conversation with it and tell it you're cracking up, and it'll give you some support and some feedback, and help you work through that as well, and help you come up with action plans for how to deal with problems. If you do have the problem, just go to it and say, look, this is my problem. What do you think I can do? What should I do about this? How can you help me? And it will respond to you in the way that a person does, but without the kind of judgment or the worry about gossiping behind your back.
Anne Marie, you and your colleagues have produced a number of really, really excellent resources recently, including some research. And the one that you shared with me earlier showed something very interesting. If I remember correctly, something like 71% of them said that they use AI at least somewhat regularly in their teaching. But it also showed that the majority of the respondents said that they would really, really like some additional support and professional development around the appropriate and beneficial use of AI. So I suppose my question to you is, if a teacher is listening to this podcast and thinks, yeah, this is really exciting, it's interesting, chatbots, I can see maybe potential use cases, but I'd really like to learn more. Where do they start? Where can they go?
Well, I shared some links with you earlier, Hayes. If you could share those with the teachers, that would be great. There are three pieces of very recent research. As Nick says, there's a lot available out there as well on other sites like the British Council. I think you can read around it, but my advice would be to explore, to have a go. I think if the learners start using the chatbots, they'll realize how non judgmental they are, and that they should try to experiment with them. And I think the fact that the tool we're working on, for example, has got so many different activity types that the teacher could do, less confident learners, they could practice just chatting. Other ones could do more structural transactional tasks where they've actually got to get
Mm,
a job done, like ordering from a menu or a role play or something. So I think it's just have a go
mm.
and read widely, really.
Okay, so experimentation, and I think that's really franking. In the last 3 years
Hmm.
that we've been doing this Teacher Talk Tech podcast, that's been the key advice that every guest, whether from CUPA or external guests, has said is, let's just don't worry, just try it out, just experiment, and it's okay to make mistakes, and you need to
Hmm.
figure it out yourself, what works in your context, what works for you. Now, the counter argument to that might be, and some teachers who are listening might say, well, yeah, okay, but AI could be, dangerous. That there are downsides to AI. Everybody's aware of potential concerns around privacy and security. And of course, if you're teaching younger learners, there are additional concerns to think about. So when we use the word experiment, some teachers might be a little bit worried about what that would look like in practice. So does either of you have any suggestions as to how we could practice, shall we say, or experiment in a safer way?
Well, we've got to think about the downsides of using
Mm,
AI, whether it's chatbots or not, and be aware of our responsibilities of what it can and cannot do. And I think we've got to realize that the default responses from chatbots are usually using stereotypes. And I think you've got to engage with it sufficiently to
mm,
realize that the model it's trained on, it's trained on that discourse. So our solution is to make sure that we help people write prompts which avoid some of that stereotyping.
Yeah, I think developing your understanding of prompt writing is very important. I mean, at the basic level of experiment, if you've never done this already and you're just thinking of how to get into using chatbots and AI, just sit down and try having a conversation with it like you would a real person. Think of maybe choose a problem that you have in your classroom and talk through it with the chatbot. So that's at the basic level of kind of experimentation. In terms of the prompt writing is a bit different. If you think about prompt writing, think about you're in a way creating a computer program. You're putting together a list of instructions that you want the chatbot to follow. And that can be really powerful and quite interesting. I've got, a few of my tips for sort of getting better quality from your prompts is if you start your first prompt with act as and tell it what you want to be so that it's not giving you generic responses. So instead of saying, hey, I'm a teacher of English, give me some advice on this, tell it to act as an expert ESL mentor or something like that. And then it knows what field of knowledge you want it to draw from immediately. And that's quite important. You can also set it rules and things like that about levels of language you want it to use or intellectual levels you want it to reply in. So you can sort of tell it to talk to you as though you're a 5-year-old child and explain things really clearly, or you can ask it to talk to you as though you're a PhD student, and so it will reply to you at a high level. Start thinking about what you want it to be and maybe programming in a persona in that way so that it responds to you at the level that you want. If you just talk to it as a chatbot, it's going to give you generic responses. But if you start thinking about more about sort of creating the chatbot or the persona that you want to talk with, then it can be much more effective. And I think that that's one of the keys to really good prompting.
trying out different uses of AI chatbots. If Emery, if you wanted to recommend to someone who is perhaps new-ish to this, what would be a good use case, a good starting point for using AI chatbots in particular? Like, would it be like conversational practice? Would you use it as a sort of a homework tool for learners to practice interacting in the target language more? What would be your recommended starting point?
Yeah, so I think from the research we're doing and the pilot that we're running, we're finding that if a teacher assigns it for homework, it's more likely to get done than if teacher just recommends, why don't you go away and have a practice with a chatbot randomly? So if you use one as a class cohort, then if that chatbot or the tool actually has cohort level feedback, then that will help the
Mm,
teacher have view on what they're doing and the progress they're making, who's practicing, who's not practicing, and make it into a habit. Anything that you can make into a bit of a habit and do regularly will help improve, the speaking practice quality. I think, as I mentioned before, that the fact that the chatbot is non-judgmental, I think that will really help those in the class who probably speak a bit less or a bit less confident. Let them experiment with new vocabulary without fearing being judged. And I think there's a lot of tools out there now, and as I say, we're
mm,
developing some ourselves that have some structured transactional type tasks where you're getting something done, but then just have the chats. Your
mm,
success could just be practicing a little bit longer every day, speaking for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a bit longer and a bit longer. But importantly, just have
mm,
fun. And there are games out there
mm.
as well. so you can actually have fun while you're practicing your speaking.
I suppose do it at least initially. I would think
Mm.
that maybe a corollary to that, uh, do it in a structured manner. Like don't, as you said, here's a tool, you could use it if you wanted to, and then just leave them to it. But develop some sort of activity, some sort of feedback, some sort of
Yeah, you could assign it by minutes. I think some
mm,
tools you could maybe say do 3 activities or do 5 minutes to make it kind of a class level
hmm,
practice.
yeah, yeah, I like that a lot. And then of course you mentioned using it for less serious purposes as well. I mean, one of the benefits is that you can make it available to us outside the classroom. One of the benefits is that they can use these types of technologies to personalize what they're doing to their own interests, etc. So whether it's gaming or sports or whatever, I think those are really interesting starting points, and I think those will be of benefit as a teacher as well as a learner. Nick,
Depends what it is, really, doesn't it? But it's useful to have those levels.
my follow up question will be this: so Nick, I know that you have produced a number of resources for teachers, specifically about the use of AI, ChatGPT in play. You've written an ebook about this, a number of other resources, um, particularly in the context making activities more structured, so that especially learners and teachers who are less familiar with this, who it might be their first time to work with this type of technology in the classroom. Can you give us a suggestion and an idea for what would be a way of introducing type of activity and technology in such a way that it actually provides learners with the necessary support and structure?
Yeah, I think one of the important things is to sort of think out what you want your students to do and what you want your students to achieve from using it. It's worth, making a start. Anything that you want them to do or any way that you want to work with them to work with it, it's worth demonstrating it first in the classroom. I think in a lot of ways, AI chatbots are quite simple to work with because you can have this normal conversation with them. But don't assume that your students will just be able to do it. If you want them to do a role play with a chatbot, for example, which I think is a great thing to get students doing, do it and demo it in front of the class too, and sort of get suggestions about what to say, and then give them copies of those prompts to go away and try out themselves. I think this powerful aspect about of getting students to work autonomously is very important. So, I think anything you want them to try, demonstrate it in class first, and then give them those prompts that you use to take away and try them work with on their own at home. And I think you can really start building some sort of learner autonomy there and showing them how powerful that is and how useful that is. I think one of the other great ways of getting them to use it is if they've got a phone, they can download ChatGPT app or something like that, and they can actually start speaking to it, and that becomes very easy. You can get plugins for the computer if they're using it on a computer so that they can talk to it. And I think that's very powerful as well because, they can see the degree to which it's understanding them, it kind of annotates what they say and they can see the written form of what they say. It will reply to them using voice and they can see the text of what it's replying as well. So there's some really easy, good ways to get started there that are kind of aren't too difficult to implement.
All right. I'm going to move on to our final question, which I always ask of all the. Do you have any final words of wisdom as for teachers who might be listening to this conversation?
I think, as I've mentioned before, I think they should experiment, explore, have a go, find a tool that they think is going to work, and celebrate small wins with their learners, which could be just from holding a slightly longer conversation. But also, if
Mm.
they're practicing outside the classroom, have discussions about it inside the
Mm.
classroom, about those issues around anything they've come up against, like the stereotyping or anything. But I think
Me,
importantly, just have a go because that pressure off speaking, because in class it feels like the pressure's on, the teachers are listening, lots of other people are listening. The pressure off one on one with the chatbot in an engaging way is something that I think can really enrich the classroom itself.
Yeah, I don't know if these are words of wisdom. I'd like to think they're words of encouragement. And I think the most basic thing is to sort of get started and have a chat with it. Sit down with your computer and talk to it, whether it's through text or through voice, and start sort of interacting with it. Treat it as a knowledgeable peer. If there's something that you want to do with it or something that, you know, you're struggling to understand, ask it, talk to it and ask for suggestions. Ask it how it can help you. An interesting thing I had at my first uses of ChatGPT was I knew a lot of teachers were really panicking about their students using it to cheat. So I actually went to ChatGPT and said, what can I do to help stop my students using AI to cheat? And it came up with 10 really useful suggestions and really sound and useful advice. And so and I actually went and used another kind of AI tool to turn that into a little video that I could use with students. You can show students and it gives them this advice on why you shouldn't be using AI to cheat, how you can avoid it, the sort of things that you can do. Just things like that. Just tell it your problems, and see what it can do to help you, because it is really very helpful. It's drawing on a huge knowledge base. It's drawing on a huge language model that it's analyzed through X billions of interactions. So, draw on that. It can help you.
Thank you for listening, and check out the other conversations of the Teachers Talk Tech podcast by Cambridge University Press and Assessment.